We're at a point in the project where we're getting ready to mill the plaque to take off the epoxy layers till we can get to the point where we can sand it and finish it. It looks like this right now. And we're going to take it from this to its final product. The way we're going to do that is using a surfacing bit initially, and that surfacing bit is an RC2255. That's the one that we use on a regular basis. We like it because it has these interchangeable blades. It is a 1/2 inch shaft, so you need to be able to have a 1/2 inch collet to hold it. And the reason we like these blades is because if they start to have tear out or chip, you can rotate them to a sharper point very easily with just a little Allen nut. I haven't had to replace these blades. I've had this for about 2 years, but I have rotated them in the past to get a cleaner cut. What will happen next is I'll insert this bit into my CNC. I'll then re-zero the CNC to my X location, and after that you'll see me come over on top of this epoxy, and then I will make my first cut so I just barely skim off the top. Now you won't be able to see when I'm cutting very well because I will have the dust shoe on, because resin likes to fly all over the place when you're surfacing this, and I don't want the mess. So it'll be noisy, the dust shoe will be on, you won't be able to hear me talk, so I want to tell you ahead of time what the plan is. I'll surface it just like you saw me in the flattening video. I'll come over here once I get everything started out, and I'll start across, and instead of coming way over to the final edge here at first, I want to check how well we're doing on the epoxy before I start taking off wood, because I'll be up maybe a 1/2 millimeter or so, maybe 1 millimeter, and I'll start shaving this off, and then when I get to the point of where I'm shaving the wood, I'll actually do the overlap. Remember, I have clearance on this side of the board so that I can come over the board, and I have clearance on the back of the board like we demonstrated before so that I can go over the board, and I still have the coordinates from the previous video. One thing I'll emphasize is remember to never stop on the board if you can help it for burning purposes. Now after I make a pass or two, I will start checking for any kind of tear out on this to make sure I don't have to change the bits. With that, let's go ahead and get set up and get started for the actual cut. I decided to go ahead and show the zeroing process since that's a critical element. Although you've seen other zeroing. Let me show you how we zero this out for milling purposes. We first start with the blade over the X that we've always zeroed on, and I'm going to come down and I'm going to zero on that. And provided there's been no significant wood movement, and it doesn't look like there have, normally you can see it. So there's my Z0 on the wood. So the next thing I like to do, Shane talked about coming up 1.5 millimeters on our controllers. We can control our Z height with this area right here in 1/10 of a millimeter. So instead of doing that on this one, what I'd like to do is I'd like to come out to where I think is about the highest spot of epoxy, or close to it, and I just want to see how high that is compared to the wood zero. So say right there, and I'll put this to try to protect the epoxy from getting dented. So that shows about 0.8. So if I'm 0.8 and above, I'll just barely skim that. Now I've reset my my bit so that I'm off of the board. As I said, I came up 0.5 inches because my epoxy was only 0.6 or 0.7 inches above the original zero that I had picked. And now we're getting ready to start the milling process, so I'll start my dust collector and start moving back and forth. And I'm not sure how much you'll actually be able to hear me once that noise sounds and the CNC gets turned on and the water pump and all that other stuff. So if you can't hear me, just know what I'm doing is sweeping back and forth. What you're looking at is one pass of milling this board. You can see I still have more to go, and we expected that because I was 0.5 millimeters above the 0 point right here. And I just wanted to shave off some of the extra layer of the actual epoxy that I've poured that goes over. So the next one I'll go to is actually zeroing it completely on this board, 0.1 millimeters below that, and we'll see how it looks at that point. We just finished milling the board. We actually needed to only mill down to a 0.5 millimeter below, actually 0.2 millimeters below the original 0 surface of the board, and it seems to have done a really good job. If you take a look at this picture, you'll see it's nice and clean, and the rest of the process now will take place with the sanding. I've already got my 1/4 inch roundover in. I've done a test cut on a scrap piece to make sure it's going to work right. And now I'm ready to put a round over on my plaque. I'll start with the back in case there's any challenges. We're at the point where we're going to start finishing this board. I'm going to start out with 180 grit, and then I'm going to work my way up through the grits until I'm happy with how it looks. We'll see how high I go. I'm using my random orbital sander. Just like I would any other finishing process. I have my compact dust collector to get all the dust up, and I have my air filtration system up there working. Turn those on in a minute. It'll start to get loud, so you won't be able to hear as much, but what's the talking when I'm finishing anyway? It doesn't matter. I'm not going to give you a whole lot. I'm going to refocus the camera down more on this, and so that's the next steps we're going to do. You will not see me wearing a dust mask because between this and that, it does a pretty good job. If there's some people that want to say something, go ahead. But I typically am not wearing my dust mask when I'm using one with adequate suction and filtration. With all that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started now on the actual finishing, and you'll see me just sanding for a while, and I'll fast speed it up here and there. But I just want to show you me going through the grit so you have a good idea of how it's done. Okay, that will be it for the 180. Always making sure I wipe off between grits. So now I'll move up to 220. Finish with 220. I'll go up to 280 as my next step. Okay, you got me. I actually did the round over at this point in the sanding process when I realized that I was sanding and I didn't have a round over, so the round over wasn't going to get sanded properly, and I should have done that before I actually started the sanding job. So for an instructional video, that's when it should have been done, is before I actually started sanding. So I put it in the instructional video, this video, at that point. That's how it is. Now don't let yourself get hung up because I'm sanding the round over that just appeared. All right, I just did the round over, and now I'm going to go ahead and sand over on the edges here, smooth those up with 220 by hand. Then I'll start again where I left off. Switching back to the 280 for one more pass at 280. All right, by this time I think you've got the gist of it. It's a bunch of sanding, changing grits. I started out at 180 and I worked myself up to 500, and I was going to decide whether I needed to go any higher or not, to go to some of Shane's levels of really high. After I got to 500, I decided I'd do a test, a pop test, by spreading some mineral oil and wiping down the board to give me a feeling for what it'll look like after it's finished. And that's when I decided that would be enough. So here's how it looked when I put the mineral oil on it. That's what you're going to see next. I've taken it up to 500 grit. And I just want to take a look at what it's looking like, see whether I need to go further or want to go further. Like I said, Shane normally goes up into the 4,000. I don't always go up that high. I want to see what this plaque looks like. And so the best way to do that, use some mineral spirits and wipe off the board. And that'll give you a feel for how this thing will look when it's finished. Now I could go higher, but I think that looks pretty good actually. And I think that's where I'm going to stop for now. Because after I get the finish on and everything's dry, that's about what it's going to look like. Let the mineral spirits evaporate. I think that looks pretty darn good without any finish. So there's no finish on this board yet, which will make it look even nicer. This board has simply been wiped off with mineral spirits. That's the end of the series, so let's go into a review and talk about what we learned. It's been a real pleasure walking through this project with you and sharing information that I've picked up over the last few years. Shane is actually the real expert. I gotta always emphasize that. I'm his Luke. He's my Obi-Wan. He's teaching me on a regular basis about this process, and I learn more every time I do this. I hope you gathered some insights from this process over the last several videos that we have created. We started out from a basic design. We talked about how we carve the various colors by starting out with a clear epoxy coat for a pre-coat. Lots of discussion about whether you really need to go to that extent for the pre-coat, and the answer is it's up to you. You don't have to do that. You want Shane's information and what he shares with his experience. You guys have seen the work that he does, and so you can have the choice. I mean, you don't have to do it. You can wipe on some polyurethane, you can wipe on some shellac, you can wipe on some resin. You can do it any way you want. This video series, the reason I used the pocket was you want to know what the master, I call him the master, is doing when he does his. And he told us in a question and answer session a couple times now that he pours a full coat of epoxy. You don't have to do it. It's just one way of doing it. So we don't need to debate about it. Let's just move on from there. There are other ideas about that. So we put the clear coat in there, and as you look at the final result, I think you'll see it's pretty good. There is no bleed coming out from the design, and the plaque looks really nice. We're at a point where the next step for me to do is to actually put some finish on it. I'm trying to decide what finish I'll put on, but I can't put on the finish until I actually end up donating the plaque to somebody and personalizing it. I don't want to laser it with a finish on it. I like to laser it before I finish it. That's the reason I'm not going to put a finish on its video series. We'll just leave it at that. As I discussed in my original announcement, of doing this video series. If you stuck through the whole series, I wanted to make sure that if you wanted to produce one of these plaques yourself, that you could, especially if you were willing to donate it to somebody else, support a veteran or support a veteran's family member who may have lost someone in the past and would like some kind of plaque like this. So if that's the case, you are welcome to the Vectric file, and that way, if you're a Vectric user, you can actually make one of these plaques yourself. All you have to do is contact me at the email in the About section. I'll also put the email in the description section of this, and ask for a copy. The reason I make you email to me is I don't know where to send it to if I don't have an email address. And I don't want anybody to have to put that in the comment section. Also, I hope you learned a thing or two during this video series. We covered several topics that we get lots of questions on. We talked about how to actually pop the bubbles, the right way to do that. We also talked about how you get a swirl. Several people asked how you get swirls, and I've got swirls both in the black and I've got a swirl in the white. So I think you can see how you can do that following the instructions provided in this video series. I plan on making future videos. Some will be about multicolor epoxy. Others will be about other things I find of interest that I think others might like to learn. One of them that I need to do is the molding toolpath, because you can do so much with that in the Vectric software. So if you're a Vectric user, you'll be wanting to see that. I've already done a tiling video with Laguna, but I'm going to do another tiling video that's more focused just for my channel, and I'll go into a little more than I did with Laguna in the future. If you enjoy this information, please make sure you subscribe and you like, comment, and you share it with others so that it becomes something worthwhile for me doing other than just something I enjoy sharing with people. I hope you have a great life. I hope you have a great day. And until we meet again in this medium, I hope you do well.